together. When people look out for each other and grab people and say, look, you belong, I'm doing this work, you're doing this work, let's do this work together. That's how we win as a people. So thank you for all of that. What we need to be thinking about during COVID. So I think there are two different things that have happened during this global pandemic as far as education is concerned. More than two, but two that are really important to think about as African American parents and grandparents. One is we've had a front row seat in seeing what is actually happening in our kids' schools and classrooms. Unfortunately, the culture of American schooling is one where educators, we as educators say, just drop your kids off. We got this. We're the experts. We're the professionals. And we'll see you at graduation. And we don't appropriately, in my opinion, engage families as part of the education of their young people. And so parents and grandparents and caregivers have gotten to see exactly what's happening in classrooms through this global pandemic. And I think that is really important. And I also think that it's important that parents have been able to exercise their will. Many parents are making choices about what they want for their kids and what they don't want for their kids. And for the first time, a lot of systems and schools are listening to parents. One of the interesting things that I think we've seen both positives and negatives from the pandemic. So a lot of our young people really, distance learning is not, virtual learning doesn't work for them. And so a lot of our young people have been left behind academically, they've been left behind socially. Their emotional health is compromised because talking to a bunch of boxes on a screen doesn't work well for them. We are a relational people, right? We connect, we touch, we feel. Our kids need to know that people care about them, and that's all really hard in a virtual space. And so as you look at, or as you hear the news talk about learning loss, and all of the terrible downsides in education, my grandmother used to say, when white people get a cold, Black people catch pneumonia, right? If learning loss is bad for everybody, it's super bad for us. And so there's been a tremendous set of negative educational impacts for our young people. At the same time, I think there have been some silver linings that have come out of the pandemic. One, for a lot of kids who were not experiencing success in school because of, the school climate or bullying or racism or whatever, there are a number of Black kids who are thriving actually in the virtual environment because they don't have to deal with the stuff that they had been dealing with. There are some kids who have been able to engage with better teachers because of the way schools are reinventing who is delivering instruction and stuff. And so I think there are some interesting pluses that come out of the pandemic too. And the question that we have to ask ourselves is, how do we deal with the bad stuff that came from the pandemic? How do we harness the good stuff that came from the pandemic and create something new for our kids moving forward? Because for most of our kids, education, if it works, it only halfway works. And each of us as parents or grandparents or caregivers are doing our best to find the right set of experiences and learning opportunities for our kids. And so I think the question, to borrow President Biden's phrase, how do we build back better? How do we ensure that what happens in the next year of schooling looks and feels very different from before, and is not just focused on, remediation and fixing learning loss? I fundamentally believe that all of this deficit talk is not good for our kids. We can acknowledge that we have some ground to make up, but when you consistently tell kids that they're behind and that, and all of this negative stuff, it's not an inspiration to get kids to motivate towards learning. And so for me, it's how do we also harness this opportunity to say to our young people, you know what, you stuck it out over an amazingly difficult period. And now, like, we got some work to do together. How do we do that work together to get them in a yes, we can motivational stance? I think that is going to be one of the key challenges.
So you are speaking about this is a moment for empowering our parents. That's what you just summed up, correct?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think parents have more of a say now. Parents have always had a say. The power structures make it difficult to exercise that say. But I think over the last year, parents have been able to literally curate. I mean, before any educational content, most of educational content came from school. And then you were finding programs or finding camps or finding tutors or finding whatever supplemental educational opportunities to make it work for your kid. And I think now, you know, you can find so many more resources and tools on the internet. I mean, there are things like Beast Academy and Worldwide Schools and Kinda Camp and all of these things that are, you know, they are bypassing the system and they're going straight to parents to say, this is what we have to offer your kids, and we've made it easy. And in many cases, it's free. And so if you do have the time and the energy, you could really curate a set of educational experiences for your kids that is complementary or in some cases independent of the traditional school system, right? If you don't have that time and energy, right? Some of us are working full time or working 2 jobs or whatever. There are still people and resources out there who can help you craft the right kind of experience. And in fact, at the very least, even if all you can do is rely on school to continue to provide what it needs to provide, you're in a different power arrangement with your teachers because teachers now realize that they need parents to do their work. This might be the single greatest, you know, thing that came out of the pandemic, that teachers are newly oriented towards parents as partners. And I think you all have the opportunity to take advantage of that, to demand what you want for your child in your child's classroom, to ride hard, to understand where your kid is and where they need to go. And teachers, you know, previously haven't really been thoughtful about explaining that in detail to parents or telling parents how they can help. I think we've shifted the power dynamic, and I think parents and teachers will be able to interact in very, very different ways. I'll say one more thing. And that is, I think what this pandemic has also taught us is that, and I used to say this all the time at DC Public Schools, schools can't do this by ourselves, right? Like schools cannot do this by ourselves. If you want to take it takes a village, whatever your metaphor is, there is a role for schools. That role is teaching and learning. There is a role for community organizations. There's a role for parents. There's a role for churches. There's a role for civic institutions. And this pandemic is the first time that we're like, oh yeah, actually, we don't have to do it all in school. Everybody can contribute to this child's growth and development. So as people are looking at summer, I'm talking to school districts all over the country. And the question they're asking is not how can we, you know, zhuzh up academic learning, because teachers are tired, kids are tired, right? And people want their kids to have fun. People want their kids to connect with folks over the summer. People want their kids to get normal again. And so they're looking at camps and they're looking at recreation departments and they're looking at cultural institutions to figure out how can we put together programs this summer that are going to pique our kids' curiosity, that are going to allow our kids to be children and to be joyful and to play and to do those kinds of things. And those things don't all have to happen at school. And so the other thing that I think we're going to see moving into the next school year and subsequently is different ways to engage partners in collaborating on the development of young people, because schools can't do it by themselves.
Okay, you answered some of the questions that I had, so I'm going to open it up to the audience. Please. Questions?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
This is Carmencita Jones. This is Travis's mom. Thank you so much for having this informal informational session this morning, I have always been Team Kaya. I miss her so, so much in our public school system. Travis met her when he was 3 years old, and he's now 16 at Cardoza. We talked to you about Linda Moo Bell.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. And so I have been on the boots on the ground for a very long time in our school system, ensuring that his needs get met. So this pandemic really opened the eyes from me talking to different parents what their children's needs are, and not really understanding when they were getting telephone calls home about their child's behavior, so to speak, that it really wasn't behavior issues. The child had needs that were not being met, and the parent and the school didn't know that, but they know it now because the parents are able to be home to work with their students a lot better. So I really appreciate you putting this information out. Camp Dogwood has always, or AnBryce has always given us very informative information. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? You can just take yourself off mute and introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hi, my name is Sharice McCrae. I worked at Camp Dogwood a couple of years ago, and I primarily work in families' households as a STEAM nanny. I basically go in and I teach children privately in their homes, where we're focusing on an art integrated curriculum. And things have picked up quite a bit. I've been doing this since 2008, part-time, but I started doing it more full-time since the pandemic. And what I'm seeing from families is they're really struggling with the transition from moving the children in the classroom to in the household, and trying to balance full-time work at home or outside of the home, but also having an educational platform for their children that works. And I'm coming into the fold, trying to help them settle everything and provide a curriculum for the children. And my question is primarily because I'm working with the early childhood population mostly. My question is just any advice or tips you could share about helping those parents in that process. It is in the more personal setting, because it's in the family's household versus being in the school environment. But any tips that could be shared about helping with that transition is most appreciated. And thank you for providing your information today. I appreciate being involved in this.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for raising your hand, Sharice. STEAM nanny. I love that concept. I love the idea of going into families' homes and helping them navigate. And I think that's another thing that we've seen through the pandemic. There are teachers, there are people like Sharice, there are people who can help with this. And whether you're full-time in the house, or whether, Sharice may have a hotline where you can just call and get tips on, what STEAM stuff looks like. I think there are opportunities, especially for people like us who know our kids, to help families manage this transition. It's a lot, because I don't have any easy answers to how you manage the transition, because we've come from a world where everybody was going somewhere every day to now that's not the case. And in some respects, parents are being called back to work when kids are not able to go back to school, and it's causing real dilemmas for families. I mean, I think a couple of things that I've seen work are when families come together. So maybe there's one parent who can stay home, and he or she will commandeer a group of kids, and it's kind of the pod idea. And people think that pods are only for rich folks or for stay-at-home moms or whatever. But I've seen pods work very well with working parents, groups of working parents. And whether it is they pool their money and they pay for somebody like Sharice, or they're able to access, especially if some of the kids are entitled to special ed services, they're able to access teachers from their school district who can come into the home and support that learning for a couple kids. So it takes some creativity. I think what I wish there was kind of a concierge, some kind of a place where you can call up and say, this is what I want to do. And then have somebody direct families to how to find somebody like Sharice, or how to find, some of these teachers who are teaching in pods. There are also foundations that are paying for these in-home services. And I just don't know a central way to connect to all of that. So I feel like that's a piece that's missing, but there are these opportunities that are popping up. I think the first thing to do, since there isn't one centralized place, is to lean on the folks who have been good at providing resources to you, like AnBryce, like Boys and Girls Clubs this summer have done a huge job of pulling resources together and supporting families, YMCAs, the Urban League. So reach out to the organizations that your kids are engaged in and ask them for help, ask them how they can help you manage the transition. I think in the house, it's, there are just key things to making this successful. Having a learning space that is separate and apart, where your kids can have some peace and quiet when they're doing their learning, and making sure that that's separate from their play space, right? We need to, part of the trick of all of this is also just the mental shifts that we have to make, right? We have physical transitions to make in terms of not going to school or whatever, but also the mental space. And that goes for parents too. You work all day, and then you also have to manage this educational thing. Like, how do you make sure that you have transition time in your head for you and your kids? Are you playing? Are you going out on walks? Are you doing whatever? I think just building that all in is really important. I'd say the final tip that I have is just give yourself some grace. Like, we are in a global pandemic. Nobody has ever done this before. Like, there is no right answer. Don't beat yourself up about it. Like, we are all doing the best we possibly can. And kids are resilient, right? Our kids, like, they are smart and they're good and they figure things out. I think another upside of the pandemic is they're developing investigative skills and different socialization skills and different time management skills. And we need to recognize and applaud that. But like, we're figuring this out. So no right answers. There are just like doing the best with what we can.
Thank you so much. That's very helpful. I can definitely take that with me. Thank you.
Sharice, it's great seeing you. Thank
You as well, Mrs. Walters.
Any other questions?
Well, I don't have a question. I have just kind of a comment. I'm sorry, I would put myself on video, but I am not. I'm Ebony McKinney. I'm Nia's Kinlaw's mother. So I basically, I have a comment, but I first want to start off by saying thank you to the AnBryce Foundation. My daughter was lucky enough to come to AnBryce coming into the 8th grade. And so I want to thank you guys for what you're doing to help build her into the person that she is going to become. As a single mom, any kind of support I can get from our community to make her better helps everyone. So first I want to start off by saying that. Second, I was thinking about when I'm thinking about COVID right now, it's basically pre-COVID, post-COVID. That's kind of the world we're living in now, right? So luckily my daughter when she entered this, she was more in an independent stage. So she didn't require as much from me, but even still, I feel like back in March, April, there was a time period when the kids were just out here. There was a couple of weeks, schools were scrambling. And even though it was a short amount of time, I feel like a lot of kids lost something, right? Some of them will be able to pick back up and go forward. Some of them, there was a disconnect, and I don't know how they will ever overcome that. So my point is that I think when I think about schooling, are the school systems thinking the expectations that they have for kids now? Do they still have those same expectations post-COVID? Some kids lost something in these months that they have not been able to interact with each other. And to me, you can't have the same expectations for kids when they were in school and they had their peers and they had these, after school programs and things that they would be able to be a part of, to now post-COVID have those, they don't have that and still have these same expectations. So I'm just wondering, is that something that the school systems are thinking of? Because we're in two different times, but the expectations are still the same for a lot of the kids. So
yeah, Ebony,
that's just the thought I have.
No, it's a great point, and it's something that the education policy people are grappling with, right? Because on the one hand, and this word expectations is really, really important, right? Because if you expect, what I have learned over my now 29 years in education is when you have high expectations for kids, kids rise to those expectations. When you have low expectations for kids, kids perform there. And most people have incredibly low expectations for Black kids. And so the challenge right now, Ebony, is really a difficult one. On the one hand, you are absolutely right? We cannot expect kids to perform at the level that they would have performed under regular circumstances, because these ain't regular circumstances. And where that's showing up is in this conversation about whether or not we should have standardized tests, right? Should you have a test at the end of the year? Should you continue with the testing regimen? Should colleges ask for the SAT this year? All of these kinds of things. And there are lots of folks saying, oh no, we can't do this the regular way because, this wasn't a regular year. At the same time, what we know as Black people is anytime you lower expectations for our kids, they actually go way lower than whatever you're lowering them to. And so people don't expect much from our kids. They don't give much to our kids, and our kids end up getting the shaft. And so, there are a bunch of folks who are like, nope, even if the tests don't have the same accountability, we need to know where our kids are, right? And so if we don't have a clear understanding of where our kids are by a somewhat objective measure, like a standardized test, then you're going to keep on selling these kids short. And so this is a big conundrum in the education policy world right now. How do we keep expectations high and keep people pushing young people to do their best? Because again, kids are resilient, they'll rise to the occasion. But how do we not also, do crazy things like wig out when they don't perform the way we want them to perform because they've just been in the midst of a global pandemic? And that is a very fair set of questions to ask. I think that the answer is schools are going to do what schools are going to do, right? And there are 5,000 school districts in the country and many more charter schools and charter management organizations. Each of those is its own political system, and they're going to make whatever calculus they want to make. To me, the question is, what are your expectations for your kid? And how do you make sure that you don't take your kid off, let your kid off the hook completely because it was a difficult year? Yes, it was a difficult year. Hell, we Black, our whole lives are difficult. And we got to work hard and make sure that we get a good education, and so that we can be prepared for this life. And so, I think it's really important as parents to continue to hold high expectations for our kids, to continue to push our kids, to give our kids grace as well, but to not take our feet off the gas, because the system wants to take its feet off the gas for our kids, and we got to keep on pushing.
Thank you. That's a great response.
Shantae Leftwich, it looks like, put a question in the chat that I want to respond to. Oh, go ahead. Come on, Shantae, I see you.
It's Shanta. It's Shanta.
Shanta, sorry.
I'm in education, and I was listening to you speak at the beginning in terms of we have a lot of students who have thrived in the virtual setting. So with the pandemic still looming, probably when we return in the fall, I've heard murmurs of districts saying that, parents may still have the option of keeping their students home if they wish. So do you see the transformation to more, we know that virtual learning was a thing before, but with the traditional K-12 settings, do you see a lot of the districts, or hear about a lot of the districts probably moving to more of hybrid models, kind of like semi-permanently or permanently?
Yep, that's a great question. I think one of the most beautiful things about this pandemic is it has reminded us that we can do two different things at one time, right? That it's not all or nothing, only in school or only out of school. In fact, a lot of districts, even if they have reopened, they've reopened with a virtual option for families who don't feel comfortable sending their kids to school. And you all know that this pandemic has disproportionately affected families of color. We've lost more of our people than anybody else has. And so rightly so, there are lots of families who are not comfortable sending their kids back to school. And schools are required to provide an education for those families. And so I see actually across the country, many school districts who, even as they prepare for fully reopening in person, they are creating options for families who don't want to do that. And I think that is that's a really good thing that's happening.
Thank you. Just a little bit of a follow-up question. So what do you think, or how do you think districts should, for students who are thriving, if a parent is saying, kind of just like, I'm not able for my student to be at home, but they are thriving in that environment, what do you suggest how to convey that message to the parent, to let them know that that may be a better option for a student, as opposed to just, them thinking in a traditional way, as opposed to thinking outside the box?
I mean, I think it's a family conversation, right? That has to happen because, even if a kid wants to stay home, sometimes there are other factors in terms of why they can't stay home. And each family is going to have to evaluate, I think, what's possible for their young people. I feel like, can't nobody tell me about my kids, just like I can't tell you about your kids. And that goes for schools too. And I think as parents, we have to reclaim our ownership rights to our kids. Like, our educators are experts in some things and we are experts in other things. And when we put those two things together, then we get what's best for kids. But neither side can say, I know all that's right and I know, whatever. And so I think it has to be first a conversation in the family about what's best for the kid, and then a conversation with schools and school districts to see how they can support whatever the family's choice is.
Thank you so much.
I had a question with regards to my son. I'm Pamela Davis Gavami, Caleb Gavami's parent. He's a senior this year, and so he did do well virtually. But I had transitioned him back to public school after being in private school, and they already had an online program, so he was already acclimated. So he pretty much did thrive. My question is along the lines of the SAT. He did take the SAT and the ACT before the pandemic, and we were planning to take it again because the scores weren't so great, but then they said it wasn't required. Do you recommend that they still take it? Because even though it's not required, and he said write some essays, we just considered, why go through that? I mean, there was still some issues with the grouping those kids to take the test, but I heard they're starting to do that again.
Yeah, they are. I used to sit on the board of the college board, the board of trustees for the college board. And so I know a little bit about this. And here's what I would say if it was my kid. I'd take the test again, because if the score, if you can afford it, or you can also get a fee waiver so that you don't have to pay for the test. The college board extends fee waivers to people. I'd take the test. And if he scored well, then I'd send that to colleges, because it's only additive, right? It helps his package. If he doesn't do well, just don't send the score reports anywhere. You get to decide whether those scores go anywhere or not. And so if he doesn't do well, then don't send the score reports and rely on the essays and the recommendations. And a lot of schools are waiving, SAT and ACT requirements. if he has a strong package otherwise, super cool. I'm on the better safe than sorry thing. And so if
Yeah, he's done honor roll, for the whole 12th grade year. So, which has been great, but he didn't have as many classes. The other downside too, we want more scholarship money. He got accepted to Frostburg, but he plays the piano and he wanted to join a jazz band. And so he already had a relationship with the music teacher at this school, but of course he didn't get to go.
yeah,
So he didn't get to play in the band. I mean, he's done virtual things, but that's another challenge. We're going to Frostburg actually next Saturday to meet the music teacher, the tennis coach, and see how we can level additional scholarships because we didn't get as much money from financial aid. So
yeah, that's the other thing. I don't know about the ACT, but the SAT unlocks scholarship money for you. And so
okay.
you can talk to the folks at the College Board about, they've got partnerships with lots of different folks who, if kids score a certain SAT score, that invites them into the scholarship process. And so I do that as well.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm going to probably allow about 8 more minutes of questions, and then we want to turn to your Reconstruction project.
Sure.
So please, I might pick on someone. Joanne Parker, do you have a question?
Let me get, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Actually, my question had been about the culture. Let me get the video on. Had been about the culture of standardized testing and how a lot of instruction has skewed to teaching to the test rather than teaching some of the things that you talked about kids hopefully getting in the summer, which is prompting curiosity, joy of learning, that kind of thing. Do you see now a shift, given that the standardized testing is going to have some probably a dip for everyone, and as you pointed out, potentially a bigger dip for students of color, just because issues tend to be amplified whenever there's a deficit happening in a system. Do you think that there is a future in shifting away from standardized testing or attaching more importance to it?
Yep.
To standards?
Okay, here we go. So I'm gonna tell you what I really, first let me explain to you what I think the problem is around standardized tests and teaching to the test. And it is not that tests are inherently bad or that teachers are bad for teaching to the test or whatever. There is a significant issue of misalignment, right? And that is that these tests don't actually measure what is being taught in class, right? So what happens is, and this is, if you remember a few years ago, was all of this brouhaha around the Common Core standards, right? And I'm gonna be unequivocal with it. I think the Common Core standards are good. I think they raise the bar for our kids. When I got to DCPS in 2007, we were the lowest performing urban school district in the country. When I left in 2016, we were the fastest improving urban school district in the country. 4 years later, I've been gone for 4 years and they've had 4 different chancellors since me. And the DCPS is still the fastest improving urban school district in the country because we aligned to the Common Core standards and because the test was aligned to the Common Core standards and because our curriculum was aligned to the Common Core standards. So the test actually tested what kids were learning in school. Nobody has a problem if their kid is in a classroom and learns all year and has a test at the end of the year that tests on what their kids learned, right? That makes sense to you? That is how tests are supposed to work. We're in this terrible world of standardized testing being crazy because the tests test one set of things. The curriculum teaches a different set of things. Classroom teachers sometimes teach a curriculum and sometimes don't. And so what kids experience and then what parents experience is this cognitive dissonance, this complete and total disconnect, because you think your kid is learning, your kid is getting A's in class and whatnot. And then they take this test out of nowhere that tells your kid that your kid is not performing at grade level or whatever. And you're like, well, something must be wrong with the test. Something's not wrong with the test. Something is wrong with the system that allows these things to operate out of alignment, right? I fundamentally believe when the system is working right, when the curriculum is robust and thoughtful, and you have DCPS parents and educators on this call who will tell you, we revamped the entire curriculum at DC Public Schools, and we killed it on the tests. The fastest improving urban school district in the country as measured by the National Assessment of Educational Progress, a great big standardized test. And we crushed it. And our kids were taking art and music and PE and foreign language and computer. And our kids had extracurricular activities. And we put study abroad in. And because all of those things that stimulate and intellectual curiosity, that develop kids' talents in addition to their test scores, all of that is containable. You can do all of that when you have a good curriculum. We taught kids in the 2nd grade how to ride bikes. We taught kids how to swim. We taught kids archery at the same time that we were teaching them math and English and social studies and science, right? But it takes thoughtful leadership. It takes good resources. It takes political clout. It takes engaged families. And this is not how most of our school systems are set up. And that's why and so what you see is the default. Well, if the test is what counts, then how am I gonna win the test or game the test? I'm just gonna teach the things that are on the test. In fact, it's not even teachers who are trying to game the test. State departments of education will give you the test blueprint to say this is what's gonna be on the test. So it encourages people to just teach the concepts that are on the test instead of being more expansive and teaching kids as whole human beings. So I say all of that to say it's important to understand why the standardized testing is a problem. It's also important to understand that it doesn't have to be a problem. And I think we have to really push for the kind of alignment where our kids are getting examined on the things that they learn in school all year, not some random stuff that some policymakers have decided is important.
Thank you. Well, what I also found interesting was I read something about a number of private schools in Washington have all sort of gotten together and said, we are not doing the AP classes and testing anymore. The kids can still take AP tests, but we are not designating any of our classes AP because we are not forcing them to learn in that rigid content area, right? So they're kind of getting off that train, which puts so much pressure on high school students to suddenly spend their junior year in college, essentially, but taking, in a way, more classes than a college student would at a college level when they're in high school. So I think there is a little bit of, a pushback on certain kinds of testing or certain kinds of kind of barriers to entry to college. And a lot of the colleges are going SAT and ACT optional, not just because of the pandemic, just as, sort of as a way to say, it's not just about how well you test, it's who are you as a person and how hard do you work and what classes do you take. And so I see that kind of as a positive trend towards more whole person teaching.
I think that is right and that is hopeful. The problem is the reason why you have standardized testing to begin with is because that's the way it used to be. And those subjective assessments that look at whole person usually disadvantage poor kids and kids of color. And so my worry is that in this brave new world of no testing, we're gonna see the powers that be continue to prioritize what I can only, sort of describe as upper middle class trappings, right? Have you studied abroad? Have you done these things? Yes, exactly. That, you know, that many parents aren't able to turn on the way wealthy parents are and whatnot. So we got a lot to keep our eye on, folks, like everything that.
That there should be some form of optional testing that, you know, maybe part of it is just the way the testing is written, right? That it's already skewed unfairly, because that, yeah, a test can be the ultimate meritocratic opportunity, right?
Yes.
You're smart and you crush it, you deserve every opportunity, even if you haven't had these wonderful internships or foreign languages or piano lessons or whatever.
Yeah. And it has been that for some of our young people. I mean, the AP tests, again, like with every positive, there's a negative. For a lot of kids of color, the AP exams do a couple of things. Besides exposing them to what rigorous college work looks like, it actually allows them to get college credits and reduce tuition costs because they have fewer classes to take in college. And APs unlock scholarship money for kids as well. And I think the AP thing is very different because teachers actually get to decide how tough or competitive or whatever the classes are. The College Board says, here's the test, here's the content. And AP teachers all across the country do their things very differently. In some of the high pressure private schools here in DC, it's been a factory, right? And kids are cranked through. And then there are other places where AP is like the place where you are learning beautifully, right? Where your teacher is bringing in all of these amazing things and giving you a rigorous college experience. And so it's the bomb for certain kids. And so,
well, all of it underscores that it's really about the teachers. It's really about having qualified, caring, creative teachers, right?
Who also have the time and the ability to teach in a way where they can thrive and feel supported and are professionally developed. Ooh, we got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, and get paid enough that you don't have to spend, have a second job, right? Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Joanne Barker. Okay.
Thank you. This is really interesting.
Very interesting. And in fact, we could probably go on. And I think we're going to have another edition of this at some other time, because 1 hour is too little to talk about what the complexities of our educational system. But anyway, I wanted to give you a few moments on talking about your new project, Reconstruction, and why the name.
Yeah.
And how we on this call, the Zoom call, can kind of partake in it.
Sure, absolutely. So one of the things that the global pandemic has allowed, a positive thing, is it allowed me to quit my job. I was working in international education last year, and to start my own company. This is a dream come true for me, and I started a company called Reconstruction, and it is an educational technology company that teaches Black history and Black culture on an online platform. We call it an unapologetically Black education to kids all over the country, kindergarten through 12th grade. And it is a curriculum that was designed by us for us. It is delivered by tutors, we call them reconstructors, who are college students, recent college graduates, teachers, retirees, people from all across our community who are steeped in the African-American culture. And it's small group instruction where 6 to 10 kids are taking awesome classes that teach them about themselves in an identity affirming way. We teach Black excellence, Black brilliance, Black love, Black joy, Black innovation, Black entrepreneurship. We teach it all. And so what we have been able to do is we have about 100 classes. And if you go onto our website, which is reconstruction.us, and go to curriculum or courses, you'll see we have classes for shorties, who are our elementary school kids, youngins, who are our middle school kids, Gen Z, who are our high school kids. And we now have some grown folks classes because so many adults were saying, wait, I want to take Black Shakespeare, or I want to take Secure the Bag, which is the entrepreneurship course. And so we've now got some adult classes as well. And the idea is, if you think about Hebrew school, Jewish people send their kids to Hebrew school on Sundays. They don't wait for the American education system to teach them about what it means to be a Jew, to teach them their history, their culture, their games, their traditions. Chinese people send their kids to Chinese school. Korean people send their kids to Chinese school. Greek people send, you get it. And so for a long time, I wondered, what would it look like to have Hebrew school for Black kids? What if we taught our kids about our history, not that it begins with slavery and ends with civil rights, but it begins on the continent where we created universities and kingdoms and civilizations. And what if we don't think about ourselves the way the world thinks about us, as lazy and whatnot, but we actually took everything that we developed there. We were forced to different places, and our Black brilliance was so amazing that we were able to figure out how to make it work here. For people who couldn't figure it out for themselves, we learned how to use our agricultural prowess to create an economy here in the United States. We used our ingenuity to create all kinds of inventions that we couldn't do life without. We created schools, and we call it Reconstruction because the 12 years post-emancipation were perhaps the most prosperous for Black people in America. Remember, we were slaves. We didn't own stuff. We weren't supposed to be able to do anything. And in the 12 years after the Civil War, we created 37 historically Black colleges and universities, 5,000 community schools across the country. We own 25% of the farmland in the United States of America. We were registered to vote. More than 300,000 Black people were political. We elected our first Black senator to the United States Senate. The whole entire legislature of South Carolina was Black. Like, this was a time, we incorporated our own towns, we had our own banks. This was a time of incredible prosperity where, one, we had to figure out how to live with white people under a new set of working rules, and where we were like, we're not going to rely on nobody else. We are going to create our own success. And we fundamentally believe that we are living in a very similar time where we have to renegotiate how we are going to live with the other cultures here, and where we can hearken to that spirit of self-reliance, to that spirit of ingenuity, to that spirit of yes, we can, and that we can teach our young people that this is the history that they come from. And when you're empowered, when you see yourself through those eyes, you have a completely different sense of who you are in school and who you are in life and who you can be in the world. And so I get to live my dream right now. I get to create courses like Black astronauts or HBCU sports statistics, or, protests and movements across the diaspora, or cooking for the soul, where you learn the history of 5 soul food dishes, and then you learn how to cook those 5 soul food dishes. Because many of us don't live near our parents or our grandparents or our aunties who teach us the family's macaroni and cheese, recipe or whatever. And so where are our young people supposed to learn that? And so we have a program that we tried to put together that is accessible to anybody. You could actually go on right now and sign your kid up for a class. A class is $100. It's 10 sessions, so it's $10 per session per kid. And you could take a class, or we partner with schools and school districts and community-based organizations and foundations. And so a foundation might say, you know what, we're gonna pay for 100 of our families to, take a class, and we do that as well. And for those folks who are curriculum writers, if you have amazing STEAM lessons that you want to turn into a class, go onto our website. We have a Partner With Us page where you can tell us, I want to do a class on X or Y or Z. For those of you who have kids who are in college or recent college graduates or whatever, and y'all are looking for a job, we pay our tutors $20 an hour, which is way more than the $7.52 minimum wage running around the place, because we're about building generational wealth. And generational wealth is not just about money. The reason why we target college students and recent college graduates is because many of them were not taught this history. So if I employ them, not only am I paying them and providing them with a living wage, but I'm also teaching them what they need to know about Black history and Black culture at the same time. And so, yeah, we started in September. We've had about 2,500 kids take courses on the Reconstruction platform. We also do fun things, like we had the Reconstruction Fam Jam for New Year's, where we were like, you know what, end of 2020 is just rough for everybody. And so let's just have a party. Let's just bring our families together and dance for an hour. And we hired DJ Jazzy Jeff of Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince. And he did a dance party for us. And we had 20,000 people who showed up for our dance party. We have another one coming up for Juneteenth. And so I'll make sure that the AnBryce Foundation, you just get on the Instagram and party with your people and whatnot. Like, we're working on a spades tournament. Like, we just want to do things that reaffirm Black culture and Black history and Black literature. We have book clubs. And so kids are getting on and reading with them. In fact, one of our grown folks courses is called the Read and Rap course. And we have a group of parents who are reading Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me together and talking about what it means as a Black parent. And so, you know, it is an educational platform. It is a family, it's a movement, it's a whatever you want it to be, but it's all about empowering us on our terms with our history and our culture. That's what Reconstruction is all about.
How
do we contact you?
If you want to sign up for a course, so if you want to contact me personally, the AnBryce folks can give you my email address. I'm just Kaya Henderson, just like it looks on the screen, at reconstruction.us. If you want to take a course, go on the website. If you want to partner with us, all of that, you can contact us on the website. But yeah, I'll put my email in the chat, in fact.
You know, I love this platform because now I'm looking at we have some Ethiopian participants in our program. We have others who have Caribbean background, African background, and I do think it is important for them too to understand what Blacks in the USA, their history.
And we do diaspora as well. So we've got a little bit of everything, but we're really focused on our story here.
So Kaya, I think this has been amazing. I'm sure that the people on the Zoom call will say the same. And of course, you know, you talked yourself into coming back. So
I'm happy to come back.
So I will be back. I will be after you about that. It has been very inspirational. Love your vision, love your leadership, and we will stay in contact. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I understand it's a Saturday and you could be anywhere, but you chose to spend your time with us. So thanks. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.